So it now gives me a real pleasure to welcome Barrie Gott to the podcast. Barrie, it's fantastic to have you here, and once again, thank you as well for getting up so early. Now, how disappointed are you that you didn't make it onto Ken's list of favourite Australian composers?
Oh, I don't know, you know. Well, I'm an Englishman by birth, so probably I didn't rate.
Oh, it must be right. So you're going to be talking a bit about your piece, Lightwalk, tonight. And I think it's fair to say that Lightwalk marked a significant moment in the history of Salvation Army music making. It introduced this brand new swing genre into the Salvation Army band library, and I believe it was the first piece to have a published drum kit part. What would you say?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's correct, but because in 1983, Bill Hymes's Flugel solo "So Glad" was published, and that was probably the real first swing item that appeared in the journal. Bit of a challenge for a lot of bands, though.
Oh, we'll have to get some fact checkers on that one. Apologies. But what were the initial seeds of inspiration behind this iconic piece?
Good question. In the 70s, I did some study at the Conservatorium in commercial music, and then by the late 70s, I was writing commercially in Sydney, mainly for small Christian albums, and which involved a lot of styles. And also working in education. I was teaching at school at the time, and had small ensembles that we would play that sort of literature. So I guess I was already working in the field, but there was no particular reason why Lightwalk emerged. It came about on a holiday on the way back to Los Angeles from Australia, visiting family. And I just whistled, I sung a little tune to my son on the way to dinner on our first night in Honolulu, and said, "What do you think of this tune?" And he said, "I think you could do something with that, Dad." So that's where it all started. And over the next 3 days, I sent the family to the beach, and I stayed in the hotel room sketching out the piece, which seems to happen with most of my things. I get a bright idea, and then it seems to consume me. If it sticks, I'll work with it, But that's the start of it. And there's also, I was going to Star Lake as the guest conductor, and I guess I had to take something with me to the camp that seemed appropriate at the time.
Can you tell us a bit about the first performance of the piece?
Well, when we first brought it into the A band at Star Lake, they just thought it was just totally different to everything else that had been out before, and they really enjoyed it. And then when we performed it at the concert at the camp, they just went nuts, literally. They just screamed and carried on, which was quite surprising for me. I've never had a reaction to my music like that before.
Great stuff. And the Salvation Army loves change, I say somewhat sarcastically. And I'm sure that there's some people out there may have thought that using a drum kit with Salvation Army band music was utter sacrilege. But what sort of reception did you get to the piece? Was it overwhelmingly positive, or was there some on the flip side of that?
No, generally speaking, it was very, very positive. The only negative comments I heard were I think one person said to me, "Well, I was converted out of that field. I didn't expect the Salvation Army to sort of embrace it." But really, it's just another style of music. And as far as I was concerned, there was real ministry there if we could attract people to the kingdom by using that idiom. I mean, I've been doing that for a long time. From the early 70s, I had a group of musicians around Sydney. We played, like a lot of core did in those days. Like the Joy Strings in prior time, but we were doing popular music. I was influenced by the Manhattan Brass Project of Mark Free, and so I was really into that sort of expression, and it just seemed to come naturally to me.
You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Apologies. Cutting you off there. A bit of a delay, I think. Not bad for being the other side of the world, though.
That's true. That's true.
So you mentioned there a little bit about your backgrounds working in the commercial music scene. How much did that impact your writing of Salvation Army music now?
Well, I have a very eclectic taste in music. I mean, I trained as a classical trumpet player, in addition to playing cornet in the Salvation Army. So, I have a great love of classical music, and I listen to a lot of it still. I'm a great lover of big band jazz. I listen to Gordon Goodwin's band, the modern Big Fat Band these days, and find recordings on YouTube of Count Basie. I listen to Sammy Nestico's arrangements, Billy Byers. I try to keep the genre in my mind all the time, and I guess they're the influences that come about. I'm a great lover of brass bands, obviously being involved in them, and I'm quite close to some of the leading players in both within them and out of the Salvation Army. So, I love Eric Ball's music. I love listening to Journey into Freedom. I love The Kingdom Triumphant. It just goes on, and I enjoy marches like to Regent's Fair. We've just been paying tribute to Norman, and it's a joyfulness about the music that really impresses me.
And focusing now in a bit more on the piece Light Walk, I often ask the composers that come on what their influences, and often that go-to answer is another piece of Salvation Army music. But I guess at the time when you were writing this piece, this swing idiom didn't really exist within the Salvation Army so much. I guess you look outside the Salvation Armies for some inspiration. Would you say there were some particular composers that influenced this piece directly?
Well, in the style that I write, and you, excuse me for a minute, that in the style that I write, there's a particular formula that I use, which comes from the jazz world. You state the theme, you embellish it a second time, you introduce a solo element to it, an improvised element to it, and then there's a big shout chorus at the end. The only difference for me is that I try and incorporate a little chorus in the middle if it fits, and usually fits as a counter melody to that first one. So, but the influences are largely from the jazz writers, like, as I said, Sammy Nestico, who's been a great influence to many of composers around the world, and using his style and style of others, going back to the big bands of the 30s and 40s, and then through bebop, and then into the more modern area. So they're my influences as far as jazz is concerned. And then the other brass bands, the marches and arrangements that I've done come from within the band world, really.
So arguably, at the moment, some of the Salvation Army's finest jazz and swing composers, I use those large umbrella terms, really. Some of Salvation Army's composers are working in Australia right now. So I'd say yourself and Sam Creamer are really at the forefront of that idiom. Why do you think that Australia is one of the hotspots for Salvation Army jazz and swing music right now?
Well, that's a good question. Sam has a big band that he called the Revelation Band, a big band that he writes for and has a ministry with which he has a ministry, and I guess that influences a lot that he does, and he's very commercially aware, if I may put it that way, and he writes extremely well, and he's able to write for the smaller ensemble, and as they've been published, I guess first in Australia, then in the international journals. He's extremely successful. We're good friends. I try to encourage him as much as I can. I hope I've been somewhat of a mentor for him. In fact, we have a conversation later this afternoon booked on Facebook. So, there's a lot. Brian Holt, for instance, in Melbourne, writes really well in that idiom also. So I guess we've just tried to make things a little different in this country, and we're fortunate to have the musicians to be able to play it. So I don't think it's unusual for us in particular. I mean, other people like Bill Himes, Jim Kerno, Stephen Buller are all versed in that area extremely well. And we look to them for our inspiration as well.
Great. It's nice to see how internationally everything connects and inspires each other.
It's one of the great things about being a Salvationist, Matthew.
Absolutely. And it's great that we can have this conversation today as well.
True.
Now, it's often said that brass bands can't swing. Now, that is certainly the case for some brass bands I've heard, but won't be naming and shaming any of those. Although perhaps people that are watching this might want to pop some names in the comments. Who am I to say? But there are, on the flip side, some brass bands that really can swing as well. In my opinion, it's the articulation that brings this idiom music to life. And often in your pieces, like Lightwalk, they're heavily doused in articulation markings all the way through, much like any good big band chart would be. Yeah. When you're sitting down and writing all these articulations, how do you make sure they sound and feel so natural when it's played?
Well, within the jazz field, there's a certain repertoire of articulations and interpretations of them. And you would hope that when you write them, that the bandmasters do their study and obviously do their homework prior to rehearsal. But as you've just mentioned, in the education field and in the jazz field, those articulations are put in there deliberately. Publishers are very, very aware of style, and there are some differences from the legitimate field into the jazz field. The martellato is an example, being, its literal thing being hammered or forced. You can put a martellato over a long note in the classical field, but you would never do it in the jazz field because it means to play short and hard. And so it has, a particular emphasis. So that you try to say, right, what's long, what's short, and how you interpret it. The triplet feel, two quavers feels like a crotchet and quaver in a triplet feel. And you expect people, when you say easy swing or bright swing or whatever it would be, that the idiom would carry forward and therefore the articulations match.
Great stuff. And Lightwalk contains a large flugelhorn solo in it. Was this written with a particular soloist in mind? Or if not, why did you choose to feature the flugelhorn? I
think there are two influences that I like jazz flugelhorn. I like Clark Terry's work. Bill Himes had written So Glad before, and I thought that solo was quite influential. It seemed to be, for no apparent reason, that the flugelhorn would have a smoother sort of approach to it. I mean, it's been played by every cornet player in the world as well, but because sometimes the flugel player doesn't feel capable, or there are other people who are quite capable of doing it. The first solo is actually I played it on cornet at Star Lake, like a big band leader turning around, Harry James sort of thing. I thought that was probably at the time the right thing to do. Although looking back at it now, I thought it might have been a little arrogant, but then again, it was the first performance, so it seemed to be the appropriate thing to do. But the flugelhorn has a lovely sound, and it seems to work in that context.
Now, quite a personal question for you, but Lightwalk's been performed regularly now for the last quite a few years, all around the globe. But have you got a particular favourite performance or recording that you've heard to of the piece?
It's a bit like the question you gave to Ken earlier on. What are your favourite kids? There have been several. I think the initial performance that the staff band did when it was first performed in public, Robert Foster's one, that was an important performance. as I said, there are many. The Melbourne Staff Band with James Morrison's a great performance. Montclair with Wynton Marsalis is another one. When I was at Pasadena Tabernacle, John Doctor always did a fabulous solo there. And there's a couple of recordings. One band in Japan, Osaka Concert Brass, does a really nice job. And then a Belgian band had recorded. It's at a miraculous speed, but it really is quite tight and quite effective. So, you know, there are a number of them. I mean, there's so many now that have come across my desk, and people have sent performances of them. Some of them are brilliant, others not so, but they're all enthusiastic. So that's all one can ask.
Great stuff.